Hello, Pak Sofyan. Welcome.
Hi, and
Great to see you.
see you too. Yeah, thank you. A little bit dark from in here.
It's okay. It's okay. Um, so we will dive right in because I know your time tonight is limited.
Oh yeah.
Um, it is a unique session. You are going to be the first one of the second series. We're happy to be back after the holidays. Um, we will be shifting focus in this second half on the more tangible, practical, maybe less abstract aspects of planning in general, and specifically, of course, the planning of Nusantara IKN. I have been studying your resume extensively. It's long and detailed. I I will not. I will invite people to go to your LinkedIn and do the same because it would take too much time. I do want to highlight a few things. Of course, you and your office, Urban Plus, have won the competition for the first phase of Nusantara, which is currently under construction, and we hope you will be talking about that tonight. But I also want to highlight something that is maybe less known. You're working in the capacity of doing policy advice, which I think is something that throughout the series hasn't really had much attention. This idea that through smart regulations, through effective policy, you can actually steer design and shape the city. That's extremely interesting. I'm not sure if that will be part of your presentation, but if not, I'm would be very excited to loop back to that topic right after your presentation, and hopefully we'll have maybe 8, 10, 12 minutes left to have a debate, and I will field questions from the audience. They will be able to type it in the monologue bar here, and I will read them out. And I think that's probably the most efficient way for tonight. So without further ado, on behalf of UNDIP, we have online also Professor Wierik, and I think Professor Ruku is going to be here shortly. And on behalf of myself, Neville Mars, and Mars Architects, most welcome again. And please, the floor is yours, Pak Sofian.
Thank you, Neville, and hi everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and hello, Bu Wiwi, and also all the other participant here. Thank you for the generous introduction, and I hope I can fulfill some of the requests that Neville just now mentioned. And I believe some of you probably this is not the first time to look into this presentation, and I hope that this is not going to be too boring for you because I've been on this type of talk for quite some times, and it's been 5 years since we entered the competition and we won the competition, and I think it's been a great journey for all of us as a team. And me personally, when we won the competition and seeing some of the things has already been progressing. And I hope in this opportunity, I can share with you the planning and the design of it and how much it has been transformed into what has been implemented on the site. Without further ado, I'll probably gonna skip through some of this pretty early information. I think we all know the location and also why the government is thinking of moving this into the more central and less Java-centric location of Kalimantan. And for our former president, Joko Widodo, it's not only moving a capital city, but it's also a transformation of the civilization. So we look into the Indonesia Maju or Forward Indonesia 2045, where we foresee ourselves to become a developed nation by then. And this capital city is part of the effort to transform the society, not only the physical things, but it's also the society of us Indonesian towards the goals of forward-looking nation, and it's based on three pillars of reflecting national identity, which I think part and parcel of what the capital city is all about. And also the second pillar is sustainability, be it in the social, economy, and environment. And this is the cornerstone of a lot of our planning and design is all about. And also looking forward into the modern, smart, and international standard city, a smart metropolis. And I've been showing this numerous time that our president immediately, if you look at the dates, 13th of January, we won the competition in December 2019. So less than a month, he's already telling the world that we are committing for a very highly ambitious city that is in line with a lot of the agenda in the global agenda of sustainable development goals and also zero emission, low carbon, and public transportation, pedestrian friendly. All of this is not only just like an empty words, but it become a regulation. So if you pay attention to the Perpres 63 2021, then we already put all this these targets into the master plan of the capital city, that it become almost like a mandatory by law that we have to achieve that, although it's not really very clear when, but at least it's already aiming or pointing to the direction of for example 100% alternative energy, 70% green area, net zero emission, 10-minute city, 80% public transport. They all the KPIs that become the brief for us. It's almost like when we are an architect and planners, we were given a brief by the competition that we have to achieve all those. And this is the competition entry that we been selected and we won. And also it won numerous awards after that. But just to give you an idea of the second and the third, and also the original TOR that was provided by PUPR, similar brief, similar target, similar sort of like KPIs, but it can be very drastically different. The right corner image is from the second winner, the Infinite City, is coming from the Cornell University team, and the bottom right is the third winner. It has elements of certain Harvard graduates and alumni is being participant of that. So if you look at it, it's the same brief, the same capital city notion, but it is translated in a very different way. So what I'm saying is, within the same parameters, we can come up with various design and various solution. And one of the solution that we made is in particularly trying to translate those targets into a physical plan that can be implemented in certain way. So just to give you an idea of scale, our capital city zone is actually 220,000 hectares, 256,000 hectares. And within that, there's a darker red of this 56,000 hectares. And there's even even the darker one with the number one in it is actually the KIPP, or the core government area. So this competition talk about everything in there, but particularly we are talking about number one, which is the government center core, which is called KIPP. And now I think lately we've been already looking into the second one, which is the economic center, the business city. It's already been planned by the authority. But if you look at it, it is actually a constellation of cities. It's not really just one city. It's multiple cities that is within an area of 256,000, which is somewhere about similar to Jabodetabek region, metropolitan region. So, but then within this area of 256,000, the planned population is only 2 million. And if you compare that to the Jabodetabek, which is slightly close to 40 million now, it's probably about 38 million now. So it's starkly different. It's not really the same. So we are not really doing another Jakarta here, and we are dealing with somewhat low density in gross area, but within that red area, it's what we call medium density. And I'll dive into the KPIs that you can see in here. We have five sort of like a sub KPI within the social, economic, ecology, transportation, city infrastructure, and ICT infrastructure. And each of that has their own targets. Some of them interrelated, some of them actually have a consequence to each other, like the accessibility point of the 10 minutes to the social and basic necessity is actually related to the transportation of 80%, and also the within that 10-minute spread. The 70% of the green area is also part of the target that also we're not talking about the size, but we are talking also the biodiversity aspect to it. So it has a very, I would say, ambitious and very high standard that most cities in Indonesia, if not probably in the world, will has not really achieved any of this. So this is almost what I call utopian targets, target that is long in the future, but we are striving to get into that, and we'll see how this actually gonna relate to what it's gonna look like and how we embedded all this target into the physical transformation or physical attributes of the plan itself. So I'll within this talk, I'm going to talk about two different areas. One is how to interpret the vision, the goals, and the targets, the KPI, and how we respond to the nature. Our scheme is called Negara Rimba, which is now really pretty much translated into Nusantara. So it's pretty much a city that is situated in the nature or forest and in the constellation of archipelago. So within that, we talk about the model for urban development in the IKN, and hopefully this become a model for the rest of the cities in the IKN, and also become a model for other cities in Indonesia to be inspired from. So then how we can talk about the KPI that is not always come in the similar in the corresponding relationship with others, because some of the KPI contradict to each other. And later on, I'm going to talk about the sustainable urban form with the context. So let's look into, this is basically a picture of 2020 when we went to the site and we start to select where the location of the site is. This is not really the first location that we have. This is somewhat in the upper hill area, because I think the Ministry of Public Works and also the President Office was hinting that the location that we choose is too near to the water and it's not really safe from the point of view of the sea level rise. So we were given the task to go about 4 kilometers to the northeast. So we are looking into the hill area that is actually very undulating. It doesn't look that way probably in the picture, but if you look at it, it's undulating. So each of that area of the bumps is about 20 to 30-meter hills, which anywhere you go within 100-meter radius, you will find this variation of the elevation all over the place. And one thing to notice also that it's not a virgin forest, yeah. It's actually a monoculture forest of eucalyptus that is quite monocentric, and it's not monocultured, and it's actually already lost the biodiversity richness of that many years ago when the government opened this area for plantation. So by looking into the contour in here, our first principle is to be sensitive to it. We need to be able to preserve as much as possible, especially the high points. We don't touch the high points. We also don't touch the low points. We keep most of the riparian, and you probably can see it in the recent YouTube that there is already a lot of the waterway within the capital city. That's the result of our approach, that we don't want to build on the area that is the area for the water, and that become also a solution for us to keep a lot of the water as a storage. And the third approach is the road network that is responsive to the topography. This is something that may be more similar to Bandung Utara, yeah, North Bandung. It's not really Jakarta that is flat. It's probably somewhat near to Bogor or Malang. Something that the road system has to follow the contour instead of go against it. So we are doing as much as we can to connect them, interconnect them, because remember, one of the KPI that we have to do is the efficiency of the public transport. So the road has to be interconnected, but in the network that is not necessarily always grid or rectangular, but it's more meandering, and it's also creating a lot of curvy road that become part of the character of the capital city now. And we also try to put in certain structures, yeah, the structures of celebrating the key spaces where we celebrate the relationship between man, nature, and the higher being, something that is inherent to our culture. And this is something that we can find in Bali, in Bandung, in Yogyakarta, in many parts of Indonesia. This is a wisdom that almost become universal, and that's something that we also want to bring to the capital city. So we have the notion of the axis, which one may probably relate that to like in Washington DC, in Canberra, or in Putrajaya. It become part of the tradition of the capital city to create certain level of axis, and it's somewhat related to power. But then in here, not necessarily all about power, but it's also about relationship between man and the higher being, man, and man with the nature, which in Bali it's called Trihita Karana, and in many various cultures in Indonesia, there is certain sort of like a belief system of that too. And then we go into the next level of the green corridor, which is trying to keep as much as possible the main, what we call the flora and fauna corridor, to make sure that the even the animal can still have a place to roam around the city. Something that is missing in our main city nowadays, because we tend to destroy this sort of like ecological corridor, and we missed that already. And but then we translate into more, even more refined network of green fingers, where we identify all most of the riparians, the area that you earlier in the couple slides before, you see the area that is not that is low lying, and that's something that we also want to keep. And by doing this, we create a almost like a constellation of islands, right? It's an islands of development that is surrounded by the green. And this can help us to translate the KPI of the 70% develop a green area and only 30% being developed, because it can be in the net in the form of this organic network. But one can also argue you want to create more green cities by creating a big park in the middle, for example, and surrounded by development, like in New York, for example, Central Park. But we take this decision of making it more natural, because we really want to preserve the environment. And by doing this also, we can save a lot of costs of not filling and cutting the land. And also the sixth principle is the mixed use and diversity. So we tend to in modern planning, we try to avoid single zoning approach, where you work in one location and you have to commute to another location for a residential area, and you travel another there's in area for schools, etc., etc. So within this, what we call mixed diverse land uses, we try to mix a lot of the land uses to become more blend, and we try to bring the certain activity pattern to be closer within that 10 minutes radius. So it is not impossible nowadays that in the ministry that you also have housing area. Like you probably see some of the 47 Rusun ISN, or the public housing for the government officials, is actually in a very good proximity with the government centers. And we try to, this is something that I want to mention about the contradiction between one KPI to another. Like, for example, 70% of the green area, which is very different with our um, normal city. Our normal city, if it's a developer made city like Bumi Serpong Damai or some Chitra, Raya city, most development is actually more to be developed, right? So it's 60% more developed, 40% you don't develop. In here is 70% don't develop. You don't develop on that. You only live with the 30%. But then you need to reach all the basic necessity within 10 minutes. How can you do 10 minutes between one to another if you have 70% green area that is separating you from one place to another? So that become a contradiction. And you need to also build an 80% public transport model, which is 8 out of 10 people have to use public transport. That is also another difficulty. If we have so many open spaces that intertwining, how can you bring people closer within that 500-meter radius and expect them to walk and to the public transport and use the public transport effectively? So that needs certain level of rebalancing and adjusting it, and you need to strike certain level of balance between density and the optimal walking transit distance. And by doing that, we also need to be able to measure it. It's not just empty words or some kind of aspirational target. We need to be able to model it. We need to be able to prove it that people can really still walk, although you are separated by a lot of greenery. So we come up with what we call transit-oriented polycentric city, which is a combination of transit-oriented development, but then we also put certain level of um, polycentricness of multiple nodes of that. So we start, of course, with having all the public transport routes to be circulating effectively in all the places. It's not always straight, but it is roaming within that kind of parameter. And we put in the 10 minutes radius of that, the transit radius, and we build density around the radius. So we start with public transport first, build the density around it, then only we start to think about the suburban approach. So we try to avoid suburban approach, although we still have to accommodate it at some point. But majority of the development has to be within the transit radius. And we build and we incentivize people that it can be using more walking distance within that radius. And we also try to promote public transport, and we try to limit the private vehicles ownership within that by also cutting down the number of parking garage, for example. So that become part of our strategy to create a development that we call the 3D, which is the density, the design, and diversity. We try to create that kind of 10 minutes livable city within that radius of each of the clusters here. And by doing that, we hope that we put pedestrian and people first above others motorized vehicle, which is consuming the most energy, whereas pedestrian creating a better lifestyle, healthier, and also lower costs. And of course, we embedded into that also the readily available technology of smart city, smart water, smart infrastructures, by using a lot of the infrastructures, corridors that we already identify that also have the backbone of the uh, um, uh, IT component that is already within the smart infrastructure that we provide in the multi-utility tunnel that we provide, that we plan for. So that's the first part. And the result of that is basically this plan that is now being used by the Autorita of IKN to be implemented. Part of this area in the purple is already starting to be available, and you can see it. Some of this yellow area is become the second and the third cities within the KIPP. And I would say more than 70% of this area is already been what we call planned and also targeted by the Autorita to be working together with various parties, including the private investors as well. So it looks like all this area will be built within the next 5 years. And some of the commitments like Mayapada Hospital, the Pakuwon, the Pakubuono, the Agung Sedayu Hotel, Nusantara Hotel is already even under construction now. So that plan, when we started in 2022, the land looks like that. So some of the remnants of the road already starting. But when we plan, so that's some of the area that we have. And then starting in the 2023, you start to see this pattern. Of course, some may say that, oh, you are destroying the forest. But remember, majority of this area is already disturbed anyway. So the road system, that the plan that we did in 2021, 22 is being implemented in 2024, is start to take shape. And then if you look at the left and the right in the same scale, is getting there. I think our government already started to pour some investment and also some budget into it. So we already start doing this. So for those who probably still think that, oh, the capital city is not gonna happen, is probably stopped by this new government. At this kind of rate, if you look at the development that is already happening, is too late to back up. I think it's already a lot of things are already happening on the ground. And now let's talk about the second topic, which is the sustainable urban form. Let's talk about more tangible, more beyond the kind of like big scale of planning. We talk about the built form that respond to the nature and how we push the thinking forward, because we try to create an idea of forest city or city in the forest, not a city in the garden, not city in the park, but city in the forest. And how much nature is what we are talking about. Nature here is really the original nature. It's not only just a man-made nature. The thick forest of Borneo give us inspiration of how we can also translate that into the built form of the city. So we try to mimic the tropical forest sort of like organization and how they can relate to each other, how the plants speak to one another, how it actually has the roots that can distribute all the nutrient from the top, taking photosynthesis and then transfers that into the ground, how the animal connect from one to another, how the animal can jump from one tree to another. So we try to use some of those elements into our city, where we see the top level can be the origin of the energy source, the structure of the building, and also the utility can become the conduit for our infrastructure and utilities. The ground level can be where a lot of the activity can happen. And the interconnectivity between one level to another, just like the branches reaching out, is also part and parcel of how we think people can move around easily, because you can't expect people to walk up and down, especially if you have difficulty of aging or disabilities. We need to be able to connect from one building to another in most straight way. And we also have the old wisdom or the vernacular wisdom of the rumah panggung, yeah, or the housing on the stilts, where we allow the nature elements, the water and the wind, to penetrate through the building, the base of the building, where we live upstairs, and the animal and the nature shared on the ground stairs. And this also proved to be more very agile and also much more earthquake proof, right? Although this area doesn't have any earthquake that is imminent, but we think that a lot of the old wisdom still can be embedded into our configuration, where we translate that into how the building actually can be planned. So we liberate the base of the building to allow for passive cooling, for the wind to penetrate, to reduce the amount of the energy and also the fossil fuels coming from the air conditioning, coming from the mechanization of the building, and allow using a lot of the stilts to kind of like carefully step into the topography without destroying the shape of the land. So you can see in this diagram, we try to adapt to the contour, and this is the diagram for the government blocks, yeah. And the second one remember the riparian system, the micro green fingers that we have that we plan, which is part and parcel of the land use plan. So those green will be stay there forever. I mean, at least to the extent of the plan. So within that 10 minutes, you can always achieve this kind of riparian park. It become part of the nature-based solution, and it also become the ecological corridor and the bridges between one place to another, and it also become cooling mechanism for the wind actually. So the wind can come through and penetrate a lot of our base of our building, and we also create this kind of what we call micro mobility and integrated connectivity between public transport and the inter building. So we think that connecting one building to another in the most straight way will help people to incentivize them to walk instead of going around and up and down, and also activating the ground floor to be more multi-layered, to be also filled with vibrancy of activity and also public accessible uses. So again, to incentivize walking and public services initiative. So by doing that, we try to come up with the first draft of our what we call Kemenko, or the coordinating ministry complex in front of the palace, and also the civic plaza in front of it. That is actually similar to what we call alun-alun in a lot of our cities in Indonesia. So that's where the gathering place for the people. It's also the congregation for the public to come in. And by 2024, the similar rendering is already transformed into something that is already built. So this is already happening, guys. And I think what we want to see is how whether this works as what we envision to be. And yeah, and then if you look at the nature concept of the green finger, where we keep a lot of the riparian and we have a minimal changes to the contour. So our plaza, Civic Plaza, unlike Washington D.C. that is straight and very formal, we create much more naturalistic. It's actually a mix of forests and waterway, terraces, which is distinctly us, Nusantara in Indonesia. And I hope that this become like a model for the new capital city that is more embracing the nature features. And a lot of our building is actually already planned for passive design, and we use CFD analysis to model the wind. We also make sure that the performance of the 10-minute city can be achieved by using a lot of the what we call the urban network analysis and also the pedestrian modeling. And the space is green, it's not hardscape, so it's also not reflecting a lot of heat. So we think that this become part of the solution. And if you look at the riparian there, the water become the element that is retained, that we also keep a lot of the riparian to become natural, and it become also water storage for our facilities. Yeah, so that's the kind of the aerial rendering of that. So from the design that we did on 2022, I hope that the rendering doesn't lie. So the rendering shows also what the thing that can be built on the ground. Of course, a lot of the trees need time to grow, but at least the basic fundamentals of the allowance and also the allocation is already there. Some of this idea of the biomimicry of the building that is more high performing, that has a lot of cantilever to reduce the heat and also to reduce the need for air condition. So a lot of our government building can use the operable windows, so they can combine between air condition and also the natural ventilation. And the bridges is also ongoing. The interconnectivity is also start to happen, and the axis from the palace is already starting to take shape. And just a most more recent one that I have seen also happening. This is part of our extension of the axis from from the palace all the way to the Tenggara, to the southeast. We call it Plaza Bineka, where we celebrate our diversity of our 34 different provinces in Indonesia. Now it's no longer 34, but the time when we did it, it was 34. So we mark the date and the time when we did the capital city. There were 34 provinces in one location, and that now starting to take shape, and it has a lot of symbolism to it, a lot of representation of the culture. So if you look into each of the monument there is an inscription of the local sort of symbology, and also ethnic sort of like pattern that representing the provinces. So all the provinces in Indonesia are represented here. Well, I think that's it for me, but I guess if I can probably spare a little bit more time, uh, Neville, just now you mentioned about the how we can how we can put policy into the so how to maintain and configure all these ideas that can still be managed and adapt in the future. So now we are entering the era of smart city and also digital sort of like tools. So what we first, when we do the planning, we do iteration of what we call between urban design, urban planning, transportation, infrastructure, and the land topography and the geology, with all the KPI as a target. But then we keep doing iteration using smart modeling and also environmental engineering evaluation. And with that, of course, there is a draft of the legal drafting of the product. And also there's a new constraint of cost, risk, and time. But then we need to also use a lot of what we call the geobeam and the parametric design to keep enhancing and keep improving our product. So at the result and the yellow box there is a dynamic performance-based urban design guidelines. So it's not a traditional design guidelines that is every 5 years we look into it. Or at least this is the intention. Yeah, I don't know whether this is being implemented or not, but with these tools, you can manage, control, explore, and monitor the development and investment in the next 30 years. And this should be adapted by the capital authority. And of course, we are using different methods and different tools like different softwares, the network analysis, the IES, and also the rhinoceros and grasshopper to not only model it, but also to look into the implementation of it. So in the future, hopefully we can not just use the typical standard solution of the one in the gray box in here is typical sort of linear sort of a process of construction and reviewing, and that's it, become a DAD, and then you create, you come in the permit and develop it. But then you also have all the yellow boxes of sensors predicting it before this developing it, so you can have certain level of performance that can be derived from the modeling. And if it's not good enough, then you keep evaluating it, keep iterating it. And if you already build it, then there is a sensor on the ground, climate sensor, disaster sensor, energy sensors, traffic and mobility sensors to monitor the real performance. And it can be live data and use a lot of the big data to analyze what you can do in the next future if you want to, for example, um, uh, at a certain point you cannot reach like all these high KPIs in instantly, but then you can gradually going to there. So you use data, you use tools and technology to manage your policy. So that's probably how we see and foresee how the city of Nusantara progress in the future, and hopefully that become the direction for us to take. Thank you very much. I stop here, and I hope that this become part of the discussion.
Wow. Thank you, Pak. That was overwhelming, and thank
A
you for
lot of
going
things, yeah.
into yeah, but that's for this particular series is exactly what is required. So we really appreciate that. I have uh, a long list of kind of specific questions, but I'm not important in this process. If there are people, let me see, there's already a few coming through, I think. I'll give you some time to draft some questions in the chat box, but allow me to maybe kickstart the discussion. Like, first of all, it's just wonderful you won. It's an extremely, personally, I think it's an extremely persuasive and convincing scheme that kind of balances a very site-specific response and at the same time tries to become a framework for future development. And that's, of course, where we are particularly interested, how this scheme, if you allow me, maybe can be understood as a seed for ongoing growth. And it's wonderful to see that in the construction it's so close to the plans. That's not very often the case, of course.
With the exception of the bird. The bird
Yeah,
wasn't in the plan. The Batman cave is not in the plan.
yeah, you mentioned it on our previous call, I think. But the structure, the morphology
Yes.
of your
Mm.
organic road system and the hydrology is wonderful, and it's there, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken, as far as
Yep.
I can see also on site. Um, I have a few sort of more sort of macro questions. The first one is a little bit cheeky. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the the very concept of a new town is, I think we have to all agree, is still a dubious one. To plan a city from scratch,
Yep.
to plan a city top down, and especially to plan a city in isolation comes with many innate challenges. Now looking back, how do you feel about that as a model?
Yeah, I guess this is not necessarily the physical sort of like or the design sort of answer, because when you are asked to design certain things with certain criteria and parameter, you just have to do it, right? So, but then there is what we call the invisible hands of uh, forces that make people move. Um, of course, if this is a private cities, like a development cities, the logic is not going to happen. You know, there's no logic of this. You can't really build 6,000 hectares of land where 70% of them is not used. So it's very unusual. The business calculation doesn't make sense. The population that you grow into it is also doesn't make sense because there's nobody there, and to entice normal people without any reason to be there out of nothing is just dubious. But then it is a government owned city, it's a government driven city. It is something that the government first, of course. Oh yeah, another thing that also dubious is the cost. No sane developer will come up with 40 something trillion rupiah to build a city all at once. Everybody in the private world will do it incrementally. So we kind of like skip all those because the government intend to plunge money on that kind of much a bigger scale, and to also have almost like a necessity for moving the top level government, which is the ministries, all the way in. So I think it has certain merit that the government is behind all of this. They have certain needs of moving their government officials and their government people or the government staff. So it is almost to me top level, top down, almost iron fisted approach that you're gonna have to move there. So the first seat of the people will be the government people, which is going to happen probably, hopefully in April. 47 apartments already been constructed. So that is something that no private developer can ever do and can ever match. They cannot force within that 47 towers. I think we have 50 units per tower. So you end up with at least 6,000 to 7,000 people initially will come, and they have no choice, they have to move. Right, so the president move, and then the legislative council move, the all the government ministries also move, and the the government people also move, then you start to see at least a good 10,000 people initial population to coming. But then it's also not enough. I mean, business people will not come only with 10,000 people. Schools are not going to open instantly if it's 10,000 people. Hospital will not operate within that 10,000 people. So the government need to keep pushing to put more, injecting more people. But then this 10,000 initial people may do a spin-off of probably few hundred or few thousand regular non-government population, be it the workers of the hospital, the workers of the shops. There is already 8 sort of like coffee shops opening there without even having a population. The 8 coffee shop, 4 of them is already making pretty good money because every week they have 8 to 10,000 people coming in as a tourist. So you already have some level of small kind of like impetus for this development, but it is still remain a question whether you can make a full-fledged city of 250,000 people, for example, because that's the aspiration of the KIPP, 6,000 hectares with 250,000 up to 300,000 people. So the journey to go there is the big question. And how the government you cannot expect 250,000 people, all of them are government people. So you need to entice business and investment. And our government is not in the business. I mean, it's not in their DNA to become a developer.
Right.
It's a contractor. They're constructing and expect the business will flow. So that's where I think Capital Authority of Indonesia, Nusantara, have a significant role to play to become almost like a, thinking different hats of regulatory, but also investment hat and talking business to the business people to create this kind of snowballing effect that can become a bigger and bigger entity. So yeah, I think it's still remain a big sort of like if we don't if we don't pull it off, then it is hard to happen. Although all the good thinking behind it is already there, at least.
Right. So maybe a follow-up question then is, what do you feel is kind of that critical mass that you need to achieve for IKN to start operating along its own market logic for the business case to begin to make sense?
Yes. And
Do you have a
and
number?
and I would like to add into that is I don't think we can only use government as the so-called the pinpoint for this, because by doing that you only have one target that if it fails, then it will completely fails. Everything will be fails. So I think it's not always in the location that we pick that become the source of our pressure point. We need to also think about the other cities like Balikpapan, Samarinda, and also the shouldering area in between of the cities. So that needs to be injected with economic drivers. You need to see the effort of building these 250,000 towns and pumping money of almost 100 trillion in the future. That money needs to be circulated somewhere within that proximity of the city. It cannot just go all back to the Java or go back to the different islands. So you need to create almost like an ecosystem of economic entities that can benefit from the spending of this huge spending of the government, and that can spin another kind of economy and create certain level of I would say economic generation that also creates certain demands. And in that lies within that is you need to open for private people to capture those opportunity and play on the next level of spin-off of this capital city that can help them to grow, and together as a overall sort of ecosystem, then you will become bigger. Then you can create, for example, the easiest lowest lying fruit is the construction chain of industries. Open up material sort of like factories, sustainable material, for example. Make furniture sort of like businesses. Make solar panel downstream industries. and used and created by the locals. So you don't import everything, make it more localized. Then you start to empower the people, empower local businesses, and they will become, oh, I need to stay here. I need to put my managers there. Then you start to create what we call the common cities, not only the government city, the common city of the surrounding that can help the business, I mean, the economy of the overall town. So I think they need to think outside of the government, sort of like government thinking head.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, it refers to something that was mentioned earlier in this series, where many of new towns, especially government-initiated new towns, tend to kind of thrive exactly the way you describe, because they generate their own revenue, they have their own labor force to build their own city, etc. But then there's an almost natural tendency for them to also fail in order then to become successful in the long term.
Yes.
So it won't be linear for sure. Could you maybe expand a little on IKN in relation to the other cities, sort of the regional network, and also the agricultural surroundings? I'm assuming the city should feed itself as much as possible. Has there been... Oh, oh, you stopped sharing. Has there been an a
Oops, sorry.
clear vision for the, let's say, the nutrients that are going to be consumed in IKN?
Yeah, I guess if you look at this map, and we talk about the macro structure of the city, you start to see the city number 7, 8, and 9, agriculture industry, center of farming, and the high-tech industry. So number 7 and 8 is the plan for what we call the food estate, agricultural cities. That's where the area of Samboja. I don't know. I mean, I'm not the person who's coming with this location and the team, but of course, what I've been talking about is mostly done by Ministry of Public Works, which is much more construction related, infrastructure related. But the policy of the overall is actually done by Bapanas, the Ministry of or the planning departments of national planning departments. Yeah, and they are more the think tank, they are more the economic and the investment sort of like arm of the government that can talk about that level of intervention. But again, all of that is still in the planning. uh, there is an intention to go there, but the implementation right now is very much concentrated on number one, number two, and number three. We haven't really touched on the number 7 and 8, but it is in the document of the long-term plan. And of course, apart from the food, we also talk about the energy. So number 3 and number 5 has some level of solar farms. So one can ask where the energy come from. So there is already certain level of initiative by the government and some businesses that also planning to do a solar energy farm. And again, number 7, number 8 could be another food farm. And that's the plan one. The organic one is already happening in the Pasir Penajam Kabupaten, where certain level of small number of agro farms already start to come in. But I can sense that majority of the landscape that you see in here is more industrial production forests. So it's paper pulp, a lot of the palm oils, not not something that has to do with food, because there's certain level of fertility that is an issue here. The water is not easily found in here. The geological formation of the land is also impenetrable to water. There's a lot of clay on the in the underneath. So the water is become an issue. And I think a lot of the question in the forum also asking about how the water is being planned here. Yeah, I guess then we are lucky that in the Ministry of Public Works, there are a lot of specialists on the water schemes. So first, we can't really do an underground water aquifer anymore. We can't really extract from it, and there's not really much groundwater in here. that's being the reason why there's not many people within this area, because people who follow the freshwater source, right? And you can only find a specks of small little villages, but they are mainly using the rainwater and also the river water as their primary source. So in our capital city, we plan for what we call water sensitive urban design and also water capture. So we all the water that falls into the ground, we either let it flow, let it go underwater, under the ground, which is if it's not penetrable, then it become part of the surface water that we capture. In number one, we already have almost 28 small reservoir. They all interconnected. They all part of the riparian that I showed before. So all those water is already being captured within this corridor. Sorry, yeah, within this one. So you see, naturally the water is being collected. Is we don't have a lot of effort to create a reservoir or anything. So we just need to put some dam, some sort of like water gate, and the water is already collected there. And that become part of the, I think 40% of the source of the water can be using the surface water, but the other 60% come from the big reservoir that is now already built in Sepaku, about 7.5 kilometers away from our location.
Interesting. Okay. Let me shoot two questions from the chat box at you at once. One is, could you expand on waste management? And the second one is, could you maybe explore this idea of your green space and how you envision the reforestation and achieving biodiversity?
Yes.
Waste
Okay.
management and
Yeah,
green
the
space.
waste for the waste management, yeah, it's part and parcel of the fresh water, where the fresh water come from. You can see it on the right but corner there. There's a reservoir that comes from the high level ground. Using gravity, we flow the fresh water all the way to the anything below that. So the reservoir is in the elevation about 70 to 100 meter higher than the city. So it can flow by gravity. But then a lot of the waste is actually using the gravity also. A lot of our riparian is not built, so that's also an advantage. So a lot of our waste is collected at the lower point. You see the WWTP there. It's not the exact location, but all the WWTP, we have three of them now, each for one city. Is already one of them is already being built. So we have an integrated wastewater and also solid waste center that can help, that can use also some of the waste to become energy. So yeah, it's already been planned. So I think our Ministry of Public Works has done a great job on doing that. And some of this water can be reusable too, and some of them is also processed before it's being released to the Balikpapan Bay. And for the green, yeah, for the green, yeah, I think if you look at it, there's a big, there's a big sort of effort of making all the green area, the 70% of the green area, at least we don't build on it. So that's the first things that we already done. So the land use plan that you saw in the later slide already mandate that the green that is already about, we end up with 65, not 70 at the end of the day. That 65% is embedded into the plan, so nobody can touch it. But then the question that you raise is very accurate. It's actually monocultured right now. It's actually paper pulp trees. It's not even a forest yet. So we have a huge task in the next 10, 20, 50, 30 years to start replanting, reforest that with certain level of formula of making it natural again. Because right now it's not natural. 99% of the land is actually already destroyed in the 90s during the time uh, when we changed the area into paper pulp plantation. But our job is to transform these green spaces into a series of forests, or we also create a botanical garden now, a plant collection, and ecological corridor throughout all the area on the city. So yeah, as much as we built the towers of the mid-rise towers for the government official, we also have to start planting the trees. And I think they already start to have some uh, plant, sort of like, what do you call it? um, in area of near the Bukit Suharto, we already start to put the seeds, and then we start to grow it into a collection of young plants and to be transplanted to this area. So a lot of the trees that you see in the site now is actually come from that area of Semayang. Sorry, Macau. I forgot the name. But there is already 1 million seeds that Pak Jokowi already planted for this area. So we should have much more than that. I mean, we need probably 10 million seeds that in the next 10 years will be harvested, and we can move it to our green area in the capital city.
Interesting. Um, with regards to the vegetation, do you see that that can become an integral part of the business model? Everybody nowadays
Right.
talks about ecosystem services.
Yes.
It used to be a plantation, but that was a monoculture. Is there any way to have your cake and eat it too, to have a biodiverse forest and also, produce food and maybe materials, etc.?
Yeah, it's a long shot. I think right now we are doing the seed, which is a small one. I think in comes in terms of industrial scale, there are different wood timber source in Bukit Bangkirai, which is already become an industry on its own. The European and the Japanese buying those trees, or although they already have a FSC certification, so you need to replant every trees that you cut. But I think if we are talking about food, it's a different type of plantation. I think we need to be aware about also the pesticide and also all the food grade that you need to have, and it tend not to be as biodiverse as forest, whereas forest is much more, I would say, indigenous, and we try to match 50% of the species in here to match the Kalimantan or the Borneo species, and the rest of the 50%, or the 30% can is coming from Nusantara, from all over Indonesia, and only 10 to 15% can be an exotic imported plants. So what I kind of like hypothesize in here is you need to put a dollar sign on the greenery, and there is
Mhm.
already a mechanism for that. There's already a green financing for keeping reforesting certain areas. So there's certain financial sort of like incentive in that, but I think we need to expand it further, because we are dealing with a huge amount of greenery that needs to be managed, needs to be replanted. So I believe the government hasn't really touched on that. The Ministry of Environment and KLHK, yeah, and Forestry may have certain scheme which I am not aware about. So I think it's a good area to explore.
Right. It reminds me of the challenges I've faced here in China, where I'm at the moment, actually, of cities that were kind of projected instantly, and then dealing with an uncertain future tends to be quite difficult and even scary. Um, do you have ideas or concerns or advice for the long-term future of IKN? What do you have already? Some sort of vision how this seed, this core city as a seed, could expand into something else, maybe including solutions or a direction that hasn't been
Yeah.
tackled in your city?
I mean, I think the easiest way for me is to reflect on what we have done and see the reaction of the market. That's already in itself an issue that we have to deal with. And this is real, and this is something that already coming up front to uh our attention in, especially in the autorita. So remember, this capital in this part, the image that you see is 80% public government entity. So city number one is a city of government centers, right? So within that, 80% will be government housing. You can put them in the tower, you can put them in whatever shapes that we have or forms that we have. The government people will have no choice to do it. But when you go to the city number two, it's no longer a government city. It's actually a private open cities. And this principle of what we call the medium density transit oriented polycentric solution can work within the government assumptions. Think about building Singapore with the very highly intervention of the government telling the people, you have no choice. If you are not rich, if you are not with a millionaire, you cannot buy a house, a landed house. So everybody, 80% of the government, of the people in Singapore live in the public housing, in a multi-story public housing, which is efficient, which is very commendable from the sustainability point of view, because you use less land and you leave a good portion of the environment intact. But the reality of the economy, of the business and investment doesn't go that way. So we already start to have a rejection or a resistance from the private developer, who's like, I don't see why a non-government people want to buy an apartment there. Why would I buy an apartment? Because the land is so many. It is 250,000 hectares of land. Why I have to go multi-story? Why I have to go from Jakarta, 5 hours away from Jakarta, to my land and live in another apartment? So that is already a hard reality that we face, because if we start to build more suburban solution, then your sustainability factor will not happen. I don't I don't think low density single villas or single family house will be achievable by walking. People will drive. And when we have 80% of the city driving, then forget about having the 10-minute city and 80% public transport. So that's all on it in its own. It's already a dilemma that we are facing right now. I mean, the one that we did at 6,000 hectares is fine because it's a government owned and a government ruled. But the rest of that city is public and it's open market. So that is already a dilemma, which fortunately I don't need to deal with it because I'm no longer designing the next city. but it is a headache that is now being dealt with by Autorita, that open up the investment for example, Ciputra or Sinarmas, because they are known for suburban solution, and there's no formula in between. So next to it is just apartment in the very expensive places in the downtown of Jakarta. So there's no middle solution. So that's where the area that we think that if we want to be using the formula of the form that is more sustainable, what would be the urban form that is still compact enough but doesn't need to be in apartment, for example?
That's
Yeah, so that
extremely,
yeah,
yeah.
because like for example, can you deal with four-story building? Kampung, imagine kampung. Kampung is actually very dense, yeah. But the problem
Mhm.
with that is lack of infrastructure, lack of sanitation. But make a nice kampung that is infrastructurally excellent. Sanitation is actually guaranteed, but the density is not like a tower. The distance between buildings should be closer. It should also become a sense of community that is embedded in Indonesian culture. And also, there's another criticism of our solution is, oh, it's not Indonesia enough. It's very Singapore. It's very Hong Kong or Singapore or Tokyo, but not Indonesia. Indonesia don't live in the tower. We are as so embedded, as we are so attached to the land. So I think
Mm.
there's a merit to it, which I think that become a self-criticism for us too. Could it be happening in the next city? Could it be a different solution? Could this competition that, yeah, that I think Undip is doing together with you find a different still touch or still strike all the targets, but doesn't need to be like this, the one that we did for the first city. The next city should transform, should probably adapt to more local flavor or more local appetite of the investors.
Right. Well, what you describe, my first kind of thought is sort of, it sounds like the Desakota.
Yes.
Um, but I mean, rest assured, your city plan does not resemble Singapore or Hong Kong. It's its own thing, and that's really remarkable. And I really applaud you for that. That's extremely hard to achieve. The point you just raised, I'd like to kind of try and kind of revisit it, or at least kind of rephrase it, because it's so important. In previous talks, we've also heard that, especially when these cities from the 50s and 60s that had a strong social footing, when they transition to a market-driven city, that in that transition things tend to go wrong,
Yeah.
and then they need to go full circle, and then they kind of revive again. And you tie that to compactness and the fact that you need that compactness for public transit to work. All these things are really critical for this design and for the future of IKN. So that's an extremely interesting point. I don't know if I can even think of an example where mid-rise has been achieved with such a high grade of public transportation use, 80%. I think, if anything, this scheme comes really close to that. I'm very mindful of your time. We
Yes.
already kind of went over actually a little bit. I'm sorry for that. I don't see any new questions. So what I would like to do, first again, thank you for a very insightful presentation, but also going into depth with all these kind of random questions from all sides, technical and more theoretical. If Buwig, are you online? She was on a headset. Maybe you would like to either ask a final question or wrap up, even if you're
Yeah.
ready.
Yeah. Sorry. I hope you can hear my voice.
Yeah, Bu.
Okay. I just want to say thank you, Pak Sibarani. I really enjoy your presentations. And I hope it will be a fruitful insight for the participant who will join the competition. And yeah, I look forward for the discussion with you, Pak Sibarani, and for the participants here. Just want to remind you that we still have another lecture series up to the until the sometime in February, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, Pak Neville. And I'm happy also to inform you that we have now quite significant number of the participants for the competitions. And again, I just remind you that we look forward to have your innovative design. Uh, yeah, I think that's all from my remarks, and see you next week for the next lecture series. Thank
Thank
you
you.
again, Pak Sibarani. Thank you again,
We'll
Neville.
see you
Bye-bye.
during
Yeah.
as a jury member for all the participants. Note that Pak Sibari Arani will be part of the jury, so study his scheme carefully.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
exactly.
Looking
Thank
forward
Thank
to
you.
you.
that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you very much, everyone, all the participants, Neville, Bu Wiwi, and everybody. I'll see you next time. Thank you very much.